Hello everyone, today I'm going to be talking about how to monitor your validators with Lighthouse. So the solution I'm going to be talking about has no requirement for third-party hosted services. It's your node, your data. It is capable of remote monitoring, so you can monitor from anywhere in the world. You don't have to be inside your staking environment. You can monitor non-Lighthouse validators or validators that aren't your own. You can get very detailed and evolving information from this method as well. So this method is intended for a technical audience of Ethereum stakers. So a bit about me, my name is Hauner. I'm a director at Sigma Prime. I'm also a lead developer on Lighthouse, which is a Ethereum consensus, aka Eth2 implementation written in Rust, maintained by Sigma Prime. So I've been a contributor to that protocol specification since its inception. And I'm also responsible for about 60,000 validators spanning 35 nodes across 3 networks. So the vast majority of those validators, practically all of them, are testnet validators. We don't have that much Eth. So the Validator Monitor is built into the Lighthouse beacon node. So you enable it with one of the 3 flags on the command line. So these 3 flags, they all have kind of 2 effects. One of them is enabling the feature and the other is specifying which validators it should be monitoring. So the first flag, Validator Monitor pub keys, just takes a comma-separated list of public keys via the CLI. The second one, Validator Monitor file, is basically the same thing except it reads that comma-separated list from a file. It's good if you have lots of validators. And the third is Validator Monitor auto. So what that does is validators that use, when it notices particular validators using a particular endpoint, it'll then enroll them for the Validator Monitor. So the idea is that if your validators are directly connected to that beacon node, it will automatically monitor those validators. So that one is not so useful for remote monitoring. That's really useful for inside a staking environment. So before you start using this feature, just make sure you read the docs, because there's a couple more flags you want to add as well, just to make sure you're getting all the data. So what it does is for that set of validators, it produces info messages when the validator is performing well. It produces warn or error messages when that validator is not performing well. And it also exposes much more detailed per validator metrics to Prometheus and therefore Grafana. So like I said, you can monitor any validator, even those that you don't own or those that are running inside a different implementation's validator client. And you can watch them in real time via the logs or metrics. So Beacon Chain does already do a fair bit of this, but it's a pretty different solution, really. So Beacon Chain is great. I got a lot of respect for those teams. They've been really helpful to us developers. But theirs is a very user-friendly block explorer with a slick web UI that would be, I imagine, quite difficult to maintain. Whereas this is like, just a bare bones CLI tool that we can modify really quickly. Us core developers use it for troubleshooting issues and for quickly adding quite detailed things without having to worry about the average user very much. And it also has a nice benefit against Beacon Chain, is that it's not third party, so it's your node and your data, which is pretty appealing to some people. So the Validator Monitor and Beacon Chain excuse me, are both tools. They're both great, and they're not exclusive, and you should use them together. So the Validator Monitor is also a communication tool, so it allows us developers to communicate to you stakers about the performance of your validators without us knowing which validators you are or revealing your identity. So we have a problem sometimes where we can see validators on mainnet not performing well, but we don't know. We can't really contact the stakers. We can't resolve a validator public key to a phone number or an email address. So we really have no way to inform people. So this is a way that as we learn with problems on mainnet, we add them to the Validator Monitor, add new warnings for them, and then that allows us to give you a bit more of diagnosis about how your validators are performing without us actually knowing what your validators are. So it's really useful in that perspective. So the people that should use it, I think, are people with a very high technical proficiency. It is useful for average users, but I think to appreciate all the features, you have to be pretty technical. So I would suggest staking pools, Ethereum ecosystem developers, perhaps highly technical users, and also non-Lighthouse users. I mentioned this before, but if you're, say, a staking pool using another client, it might be quite useful to run Lighthouse or another client to monitor your validators as well, just in case it's picking up on something that the other implementation is not getting. So I think people shouldn't be afraid to try it out. If you're just running on your laptop, away from all your staging infrastructure, there's nothing bad that can happen. The worst thing really is that you might just get a bit confused. So the user interface for this tool is pretty simple. Configured via CLI. I talked about those 3 flags before. And then what it does is just print logs messages and then expose metrics via Prometheus. So for the rest of the talk, I'll go into, I'll show you some of the log messages and Prometheus metrics. So the information we include in these logs, you get real-time data, so that's when you get blocks, attestations, exits and slashings. You get a little log for those. And we also do end-of-epoch summary data. So when our consensus engine is computing rewards and penalties, we will spit out little logs to say like not exactly, but more detail about what your validator did during that epoch. We give a bit more information than Beacon Chain does, which is quite cool. We also create error logs when your validator is doing the wrong thing, which can be very helpful, especially when you are going back trying to figure out, perhaps Beacon Chain has told you that your validator didn't do well and you want to try and figure out exactly why. Keeping these logs around can be really useful just to go back and track through them and figure out why. So here's a bit of an example of some logs of validator 0, just watching that validator, and I'll just kind of walk through I guess a bit of a flow of an attestation for it. So this is like one stream of logs and I've just cut the middle out of it because it wasn't very interesting. So we can kind of see at the top, we see the attestation was published, and then we can see the attestation being included in several aggregates, and then we can see the attestation being included in a block. And then later, time goes on, probably epoch or 2 later, we'll then see at the bottom, rewarded by protocol. So then we get a notification here saying that we've processed the rewards and penalties for that validator, and we can see those attestations before now enshrined in the canonical chain, and they'll be rewarded for it. We can see there the validators match the head, match the target, match the source. They've done really well. Then on the other side, here's a set of logs where things didn't go perfectly. So we've got a log here, the rewarded by protocol kind of log. It's the same classification as the last one in the previous slide. But we can see here we didn't vote for the correct head, so matched head is false. And after that, we get a little warning log to say the attestation failed for matched head. So this can be, like I said, really useful when you're trying to figure out what went wrong with an attestation. So we'll quickly have a look at the metrics as well. I don't want to go too far into them, but this is kind of one part of this metrics dashboard. I've got a link to it later in the slides. So here we can see how many validators we're monitoring, their balances, and then we can see the canonical inclusion distance of which they got their reward for. And then we can also see these some of the metrics are followed by good, so there's 3 of them in a row, attestation success, head hit, and head and target hit. So if you're getting messages, if you're getting events in the good column, that's good. And then underneath we can see the inverse of each. So attestation misses, head misses, and target misses. So that's showing us when we're not quite voting for the right blocks and not getting ideal rewards. Then a little bit more detailed, we can see in these events we've got these real-time events counting when we see an attestation on the network from our validator, an aggregate, blocks, when we see the validator's attestation included in aggregates, and then when we see those attestations get included in blocks. Once again, useful for debugging. And then something I find very interesting, the second part is a bit about timing delays. So we're looking at the delays between when the first moment in which a validator should be publishing its a message and when we received it. So this can be really useful for debugging things like a dodgy network in your staking infrastructure, or perhaps an overloaded node that's not able to keep up with the network or publish messages quickly. So a couple of quick caveats about this. System, it requires a synced node, pretty straightforward. It will occasionally report on non-canonical chains because it's reporting as it goes on every block. If there's a fork or a weird orphan block, it might create a log that doesn't make it into the canonical chain. Not a big deal, just something you got to be aware of when you're doubleshooting. It's intended as a diagnostic tool, so it's not supposed to be like a rock-solid perfect monitoring tool. It's for diagnostics. And just be aware, it is, like I said before, intended for a technical audience, so something to be aware of. Got a few links here, so a couple of guides, Docker setup, the dashboard I mentioned earlier, and our Discord if you have any questions. So I think that's my 10 minutes up. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the tool. Thank you.